Every country on Earth is in debt. The United States now owes over $38 trillion, the highest figure in its history. The European Union carries around $14 trillion. Japan almost $9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia are export powerhouses like Germany and China, all owe enormous sums. But here's the paradox. If everybody owes money, who exactly is owed? This is the financial historian where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Debt isn't just a burden. It's the architecture of the modern world. Every war, every crisis, every boom and bust sits on top of this invisible scaffolding of use. And if you follow the chain of creditors long enough, you discover something unsettling. The world doesn't owe money to anyone in particular. It owes it to itself, but that doesn't mean everyone benefits equally. To understand how we reached this point, a planet drowning in over $315 trillion of total debt, nearly 3 times the size of the global economy, we need to go back to the beginning, centuries before the first credit card swipe or digital transfer. The idea of national debt was born not in Wall Street, but in war. In 1694, England was fighting France and running out of gold. The king turned to merchants for help, in exchange for a permanent stream of interest payments backed by future taxes. They financed the crown. To manage this new arrangement, the Bank of England was created. It was revolutionary. The state couldn't spend money it didn't yet have, and in return, lenders received something priceless, a promise from the government. One that could be traded, bought, or sold. That was the birth of the government bond, the seed of the modern financial system. France copied it. The Netherlands refined it. The newly independent United States adopted it to fund its revolution and later its expansion westward. National debt became not a mark of failure, but a measure of credibility. The ability to borrow was the ability to rule. Empires once conquered territory to extract gold. Now they issued bonds to extract interest. The battlefield became the balance sheet. Fast forward 3 centuries and debt has become the world's dominant export. The United States owes $38 trillion, Japan over $9 trillion, and global borrowing increases by the equivalent of $1 trillion every 100 days. Every country owes. Every bank lends. Every citizen through taxes, savings, and pensions is both debtor and creditor. But who exactly holds the other end of the rope? Let's start with the United States because its debt isn't just national. It's global. Out of that $38 trillion stories, about half is publicly held, meaning owed to investors rather than to other parts of government. Roughly 2/3 of those investors are American banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining 1/3, about $9 trillion, sits in foreign hands. Japan is the top holder with around $1 trillion, followed by China with about $800 billion. Then the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people say the US is in debt to China, that's true, but only for roughly 2% of the total. Most of the debt America owes is to America. The Treasury issues bonds. Banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve often buys them back, creating new dollars in the process. Americans pay taxes that fund interest on those bonds, which then flow into American retirement accounts. It's a circular mirror. The debt is real, but the creditor is mostly a reflection of the same system. And this circularity isn't just American, it's global. Japan lends to the US through treasuries. The US lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. Developing nations in turn lend back to advanced economies by parking foreign exchange reserves and Western bonds. It's a planetary game of hot potato, except the potato is made of promises. Every country holds someone else's IOU. Every promise is secured by another promise. It's like a pocketable where every player has borrowed chips from the next. And the only rule keeping the game alive is that nobody stands up. But there's a 4th layer, the most powerful of all, the market's themselves. Behind every government bond sits a web of institutions. Hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks managing tens of trillions in assets. They are the true arbiters of credit. They decide which nations can borrow cheaply and which will pay a premium for survival. When they lose confidence, currencies collapse, governments fall, and entire economies can be restructured overnight. Democracy decides who governs. Markets ditch it, who survives. And the ultimate market maker, the modern high priest of this system, is the central bank. Central banks don't merely manage debt, they manufacture it. Every time the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, it creates new money in exchange. The liability off one balance sheet becomes the asset of another. Every dollar in circulation represents a unit of debt somewhere else. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Every coin, every bill, every digital dollar has an IOU engraved invisibly on its surface. For decades, this loop has sustained itself through confidence. So long as investors believe governments will pay interest, even if never the principal, the machine keeps turning. But what happens when confidence wavers? We've seen it before. In Greece in 2010, the government's debt became unpayable. Bondholders panicked. Yields spiked. The European Central Bank and IMF intervened. But their rescue came with austerity. Tax hikes, spending cuts, and mass unemployment. For an entire generation, bailout became another word for sacrifice. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a national curse. In Sri Lanka, fuel shortages and political collapse followed when the government ran out of foreign currency to service loans. When the system breaks, the creditors suddenly become visible. The IMF, the rating agencies, the anonymous bondholders who hold entire nations by the throat. And yet, even after collapse, the same logic restarts. New loans replace old loans. Old debts are restructured. The machine resets with a new name on the same balance sheet. That's because in the 21st century, debt isn't designed to be repaid. It's designed to roll over. Governments today don't actually plan to pay off their debt. Not now. Not ever. That's not conspiracy. It's policy. When you or I take a loan, we're expected to repay the principal. But governments operate differently. They treat debt like a rolling subscription, issuing new bonds to pay off old ones. A process economists call refinancing. Interest becomes their outproduct. The rent charged for stability. The global economy now depends on that rent. Like a shark that must keep swimming to breathe. The global financial system today runs on confidence, not repayment. The United States will never clear its $38 trillion debt. It will refinance it forever. Japan has been rolling over its debt for decades, now exceeding 150% of GDP, and yet its government bond yields remain near zero. Investors aren't waiting to be repaid. They're waiting to renew the deal. Why? Because for them, government debt is the safest collateral in existence. A U.S. Treasury bond isn't viewed as a liability. It's an asset, the foundation of global markets. Pension funds hold it. Banks use it as security. Central banks treat it as money. The system depends on governments never paying off their debt because if they did, the world would lose its most trusted financial instrument. Imagine if Washington somehow decided to pay down every last dollar off its debt. Banks and funds around the world would suddenly lose their most stable asset. The dollar supply would shrink dramatically, triggering deflation and collapse. Paying off that it would destroy the very thing that makes the economy function. So, governments do the opposite. They keep issuing more, not recklessly, but rhythmically. The debt becomes a kind of heartbeat for capitalism itself, pulsing through every pension, mortgage, and market on earth. And that's when politicians talk about balancing the budget or paying down the national debt. They're reselling an illusion. The goal isn't to eliminate debt. It's to keep it sustainable, serviceable, and desirable enough that the system never stops believing in it. Because once belief fades, the numbers stop mattering. Confidence collapses, interest rates spike, and the economy built entirely on rolling promises grinds to a halt. That's the real secret of sovereign debt. Zeppelin was never to pay it back. The plan is to keep the world believing it will. It's a closed loop of trust, and as long as that trust holds, the numbers can stretch indefinitely. But trust is not evenly distributed. When we say we owe it to ourselves, that's only half true. Interest payments don't flow equally through society. They flow upward from taxpayers and workers to institutions and investors that hold the debt. In other words, debt isn't just a transfer between countries. It's a transfer between classes. That's why global inequality and global indebtedness rise together. The system rewards those who own debt and punishes those who merely pay it. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the same story scaled up. From households to nations, from nations to the planet. Creditors aren't villains. Debtors aren't victims. They're two sides of the same engine. The problem is what happens when the engine runs out of fuel. When new borrowing can keep pace with the promises made before. That's when the question, who's the creditor, stops being abstract and starts being personal. Because at the top of this global pyramid, there isn't one face to blame.
It isn't China. It isn't Wall Street. It isn't the IMF. It's all of them and us. The modern financial system has turned debt itself into money. Governments issue it. Banks multiply it. Investors trade it, and citizens depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor has blurred beyond recognition. Debt once meant bondage. Today, it means balance. But if that balance ever tips, if confidence breaks, the illusion ends, and we'll remember what debt really is. A promise that can't be kept forever. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.